Chapter 1. With a shock of astonishment, I read the card brought to me on a silver tray by the page boy. Dr. John Watson, M.D. I spoke the name aloud to assure myself I was seeing it rightly, for I could not believe this. Of all persons, should be the first client to enter the newly opened January 1889 office of London's, and indeed the world's, only scientific purgatorian. Dr. John Watson. John was a common enough name, but Watson? And a medical doctor? It had to be, but still I did not wish to believe it. Is it who I think it is, Jody? How would I know, m'lady? Jody, I've told you before you were to address me as Miss Meshel. Miss Meshel. I rolled my eyes, but could one expect of a boy whose mother had named him Jodfer, misspelt Jodper, in the parish registry, because riding breeches sounded genteel to her? It was Joddy's all of my ruffles and pulled sleeves that made him call me lady. But he mustn't, or people would start asking questions. I wanted the page boy to retain his awe, which kept him from realizing I was actually a mere girl, not much older than he. But I wanted him to cease and desist, the m'lady. More calmly, remembering to guard against any aristocratic edge upon my accent, I asked him, You've already told the gentleman that Dr. Ragiston is not in? Yes, m'lady. I mean, Miss Meshel. The scientific purgatorian's office bore the name of one Dr. Leslie T. Ragiston, because a scientist must be a man. But Dr. Ragiston would never be in, because he, the PhD kind of doctor, did not exist except in my mind, and upon the placards and business cards I placed in shops, kiosks, fruit stores, and lecture halls, wherever I could go. If you would invite Dr. Watson into my office, then I will see whether I can be of any help. Joddy ran out, his appearance, if not his intellect, smart, all boys in buttons with braid on his cuffs, and down the sides of his trousers, white gloves, striped hat, looking rather like a miniature layer cake atop his head. But why not? Most uniforms are absurd. The moment his back disappeared, I sank into a wooden chair behind my desk, my knees trembling so badly that my silk petticoats rustled. This wouldn't do. Taking a deep breath, I shut my eyes for a moment and called to mind my mother's face. Along with that image, I could almost hear a voice. Enola, you'll manage very well on your own. This mental exercise had the desired effect. Calmed, I opened my eyes in time to see Joddy showing Dr. Watson in from the parlour that served as a waiting room. Dr. Watson, I am Dr. Ragiston's secretary, Miss Ivy Meshel. Rising and extending my hand to the visitor, I saw exactly what I would expect to see from his writings. A sturdy English gentleman, not well-to-do, but definitely of the educated class, with a ruddy face, kind eyes, and a slight inclination towards stoutness. And I hoped he saw as I was pretending to be, an utterly conventional young working woman, with a bulbous brooch centered upon her dress front, wearing equally hideous earrings in general, much bedecked in finery of inexpensive materials mimicking the very latest, just as absurd as a uniform, fashion. A girl some of whose fair curls were not her own, but had formerly belonged, most likely to a Bavarian peasant. While respectable, a young female who was not well-bred. One whose father must have been a saddle-maker or a tavern-keeper. A girl most likely preoccupied with the pursuit of a husband, if by means of the aforementioned brooch, plus a dog-collar necklace, too many ribbons, and the too obvious hair additions, I had created this impression that my disguise was successful. Pleased to make your acquaintance, Miss Meshel. Dr. Watson had already removed his hat, of course, but quite properly had waited to shake my hand before removing his gloves and entrusting them, along with his walking stick, to the boy. Please, sit down. I indicated an armchair. Do draw close to the hearth. Dreadfully cold out. Is it not? Appalling. Never before have I seen the Thames frozen thick enough to skate across. As he spoke, he rubbed his hands together and extended them to the fire. Despite its best efforts, the room was none too warm, and I envied the visitor his cozy upholstered chair. Somehow cold and damp had not troubled me so much before as I had come to London, where already I had seen a beggar, or the bodily remains of that person, frozen to the pavement. Reseating myself on the comfortless wooden chair behind my desk, I hunched my shawl closer around my shoulders, rubbed my own hands, stiff despite the knitted mittens out of which my fingers poked, then picked up my pencil and notepad. "I am so sorry, Dr. Watson, that Dr. Ragaston has gone out. I am sure he would be delighted to meet you. You are the same Dr. Watson who is associate of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, are you not?" "I am." Polite, indeed humble, he turned to face me as he spoke. "And it is on Mr. Holmes's behalf that I am here." My heart began pounding so hard, I almost feared my visitor would hear it. No longer could I tell myself some lucky or unlucky accident had brought this particular man here to consult the world's only professional finder of things and persons lost. But I tried to sound merely polite, with the right middle-class accent and the right clerical blend of efficiency and civility. "Indeed?" Poised as if to take notes, I asked, "What is the nature of Mr. Holmes's difficulty?" "I'm sure you understand, Miss Mashube, that I prefer to wait and speak privately to Dr. Ragaston." I smiled. "And I'm sure you will understand, Dr. Watson, that I am entrusted to take down the preliminaries so as to conserve Dr. Ragaston's valuable time. I am Dr. Leslie Ragaston's authorized agent, not to take action, of course," I amended in order to soothe his natural distrust of any female. "But I often serve as his eyes and ears, just as you do for Mr. Sherlock Holmes," I added, coaxing, but trying not to sound as if I were. Trying not to show how inwardly I begged. "Please, please, I must know whether I have guessed rightly what brings you here." Um, yes," said Dr. Watson uncertainly. "Quite." He really did have gentle eyes, all the more so when he was worried. "But I'm not sure. The matter is delicate, you see. Holmes does not know about this visit." "But my brother has not sent him." My heart settled down somewhat, yet began to ache. Rather dully, I told Dr. Watson, "You can rely on my complete discretion." "Quite, of course," and as if somehow my diminishing interest had cajoled him, a troubled soul, how unburdening himself to me, he grasped the arms of his chair and began his narration. "Doubtless you know that I boarded for several years with Mr. Sherlock Holmes at the beginning of his astounding career, but as I am now married and in general practice as a medical doctor, I can see far less of him than I did formerly. It has not escaped my notice, however, that since this past summer he has seemed uneasy in his mind, and over the past few months positively distraught, to the extent that he is not eating properly nor sleeping, and I have become concerned for him not only as a friend, but as a physician. He has lost weight, his colour is unhealthy, and he has grown quite melancholy and irritable." Busily noting down all this for Dr. Ragaston, I was able to keep my head lower over my desk so that Dr. Watson could not see my face. A good thing, for I am sure dismay showed. Tears formed in my eyes. My brother, paragon of the coldly logical mind, distraught, unable to eat or sleep. I had no idea that he was capable of such depth of feeling, least of all about me. Dr. Watson went on. "Although I have asked him repeatedly what is troubling him so, he denies being in any difficulty, and when yesterday I persisted in questioning him, he flew into such a temper so out of keeping with his usual steely self-control, indeed so irrational that I felt I must act upon my concerns whether he liked it or not, for his own sake. Therefore I sought out his brother, Mr. Mycroft Holmes." Ivy Meshel, I realized, should know nothing of Sherlock Holmes's brother. Therefore I interrupted. "How does one spell his name, please?" "It's an odd name, is it not?" Watson spelled it for me, gave me Mycroft's address in London, then continued. "After some hesitation, Mycroft Holmes explained to me that he and Sherlock Holmes have the singular misfortune of being unable to locate their mother. And not only their mother gone without trace, but also their younger sister. Two family members, their only remaining family actually, have vanished. How dreadful, I murmured, keeping my eyes down. I no longer felt inclined to weep. Instead, I wanted to smile. Indeed, I wanted to thumb my nose at my ever so eldest brother Mycroft, who had wanted to make a mincing young lady of me, and I found it difficult to maintain a suitably concerned expression as I played the part of one who knew nothing of the matter. Kidnapped? Dr. Watson shook his head. There have been no ransom demands, no, they are runaways. How shocking! I remembered to remain ignorant. They have gone off together? No, separately. The mother went missing last summer, and the girl ran away 6 weeks later. As she was being sent to boarding school, she went alone. I believe that is why Holmes has taken the matter so much to heart. If the girl were with her mother, you see, he might not approve, but he would know his sister was safe. However, it seems that the girl, who's still quite a child, has travelled all by herself to London. A child, you say? A mere 14 years of age. Mycroft Holmes told me that he and his brother have reason to believe the girl has access to considerable funds. I stiffened, feeling a stab of anxiety, for how on earth could they guess that? And they fear she is disguising herself as a young gentleman of leisure. I relaxed, for nothing could be less true. I hoped never to descend to the theatrical cliché of disguising myself as a male, although I certainly did not limit myself to being Ivy Mitchell. And as such she might be exposed to decadent influences, Dr. Watson was saying, and may be trapped into a life of ill repute. Ill repute? I hadn't the vaguest notion of what he was talking about, but dutifully noted it down. Mr. Mycroft Holmes and Mr. Sherlock Holmes have some reason of thinking this? I inquired. Yes, the mother was, or is, a most determined suffragist, and the girl herself is of a regrettably unfeminine mould, it would seem. Indeed. How sad. Glancing up at him from under a poof of false bangs, I fluttered my false eyelashes and smiled with the subtly tinted lips. Indeed, I used a hint of disreputable substance called rogue, lay all over my face to change the sallow aristocratic tone of my skin to a heartier, more original pink. Could you provide Dr. Raggerstein with a photograph of the girl? No, nor of the woman either. It would seem them that they both avoided photographers. Whatever for? He sighed, his facial expression becoming for the first time somewhat less than kind. Part of their determination to act contrary to the laws of feminine nature, I suppose. Could you give me their names, please, and describe them? He spelled the names for me. Lady Eudora Vernet Holmes, Miss Enola Holmes. Mum had shown prescience when she named me Enola, which backwards spells alone. Dr. Watson said, From what I've been told, the girl is more remarkable than of the two, quite tall and thin. I've been trying to gain weight, but so far unsuccessfully, due to the fish-head soups and sheep's-head stews served by my thrifty landlady. With a long face, pronounced, that is to say, rather Ciceronian nose and chin. What a very tactful way to say that I looked entirely too much like my brother Sherlock. Having failed yet to make myself plump, I kept inside my mouth, one in each cheek a pair of rubber devices that were actually intended for filling out another unmentionable part of the personage. They, along with nostril inserts, quite altered the shape of my face. And an angular personage, rather lacking in feminine charm, continued Dr. Watson. She has shown a preference for masculine clothing and tomboyish activities, walks with a long masculine stride, and altogether may be entirely lost to decent society if she is not found soon. And the mother? I asked, in order to change the subject before I burst out laughing. 64 years of age, but appears considerably younger. Physically unremarkable, but in temperament strong-minded and willful, a talented artist who has unfortunately turned her energies to the cause of women's so-called rights. Oh, she wishes to wear trousers. He smiled at my apparent scorn for such reformers. Quite likely. She favours so-called rational dress. And are there any indicators at all as to where she might be found? None, but the girl, as I have said, is thought to be in London. I put down my pencil to face him. Very well, Dr. Watson, I will inform Dr. Ragustin of the particulars, but I must warn you that he is unlikely to take the case. My very first case, an impossible predicament. To find myself, I could not possibly touch it. Why ever not? I had already worked out the answer. Because he does not care to deal with intermediaries. He will ask why Mr. Sherlock Holmes does not come here himself. Dr. Watson interrupted with some heat, although his strong feeling was not directed at me. Because Holmes is too reserved, too proud. If he would not even tell me the reason for his distress, do you think he would divulge it to a stranger? But a fellow investigator, I remarked mildly. Even worse, he would consider himself humiliated in the presence of... Rather abruptly, Dr. Watson broke off, then asked, For the matter of that, one must wonder, who is Dr. Ragustin? Begging your pardon, Miss... Meshel. Take the name Holmes, reverse its syllables, Meshol, then spell it in the way it is pronounced, Meshel. Absurdly simple, yet he would never guess. No one would. Miss Meshel, I mean no offence, but I have made inquiries, and nobody has heard of Dr. Ragustin. I came here only because he claims to specialize in finding persons who are lost. Anything that is lost, I interjected, but I found no one who can vouch for him. Because he is making a start, just as your friend once had to do. Dr. Ragustin has yet to earn a name for himself, but you will be interested to know that he is a keen student of the methods of Mr. Sherlock Holmes. Indeed? Dr. Watson appeared mollified. Yes, he idolizes Mr. Holmes, and will be most surprised to hear that his hero has been unable himself to locate his missing mother and sister. Sitting forward as if his armchair had suddenly become more uncomfortable, Dr. Watson cleared his throat. I suppose, he said slowly, it might be because Holmes lacks interest in such cases, normally. He finds them commonplace and featureless, and generally will not look into them. Why, just yesterday, Watson added, as I was going in to see Holmes, out came Sir Eustace Alistair and Lady Alistair, who had been there to beg him to inquire into the whereabouts of their daughter, and he'd sent them away with a flea in their ear. I ignored the logical impossibility of one flea in one ear for two people, because my attention was taken up by the substance. Sir Eustace Alistair, his daughter is missing, but I have seen nothing in the papers. Watson put his fist to his mouth and coughed. It has been hushed up to prevent scandal. They feared the girl had gone off with the seducer then. I must investigate this matter. I knew that Dr. Watson would tell me no more. Already he considered that he had said too much, but he had brought me my first case after all. I would find the missing daughter of the baronet. Looking none too happy, Watson stood up. The interview was at an end. Reaching for the bell-pull, I rang for Joddy to come and see him out. I wish to meet Dr. Ragustin personally, Watson told me, before he takes any action. Of course, your street address? Dr. Ragustin will be in touch as soon as he has reviewed my notes. I lied. After I copied the address, I stood to see my visitor out at the door. And after he had left, I seated myself in the armchair he had vacated by the fire, and rather paradoxically began shivering.